"You destroyed our lives," my sister screeched. Then Mom snapped, "We wish you never existed." I walked away without a word. Now my phone is blowing up with 14 missed calls. I was never more than a shadow in my own home, an afterthought that lingered silently while my sister basked in the spotlight. My mother adored her, the golden child, and despised me with a quiet cruelty that cut deeper than any scream. Every achievement of mine was dismissed or mocked, compared mercilessly to my sister's supposed perfection. Once, during a family gathering, I stood frozen as Mom paraded me before our guests, forcing me to listen as they praised her and ridiculed me. "You'll never be good enough," she declared, her voice sharp enough to slice through my soul. It wasn't just neglect. It was calculated humiliation designed to remind me of my place or lack thereof. I craved love, validation, anything to prove I mattered. But each attempt was met with rejection, so cold it froze my heart over time. The house that should have sheltered me felt like a cage built by their disdain, where even breathing seemed intrusive. I tried so hard to prove my worth, to carve out a place where I could finally belong. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I once went an entire week without eating, just to save up for a textbook that promised to help me excel in school. When I brought it home, Mom barely glanced at it before snatching it from my hands and tossing it into the trash. "It's useless," she sneered, as if my dreams were nothing more than garbage. That same year, when my sister got expelled for cheating on an exam, I was forced to take the blame. I had to kneel in front of her teacher, tears streaming down my face, while everyone stared my humiliation their entertainment. And still, I told myself it would be worth it. If I could just become perfect enough, maybe they'd see me, maybe they'd love me. But perfection wasn't something you achieved in our house. It was reserved only for the golden child. No matter how high my grades were or how quiet I stayed, Mom continued to tell anyone who would listen that I was a burden and not worth keeping around. Her words stung worse than any slap because they weren't just insults. They were verdicts, sentences handed down by the very person who should have been my safe haven. Even when I worked part-time jobs after school to contribute to household expenses, my efforts went unnoticed. Once, I saved up money to buy groceries, only for my mom to accuse me of stealing from her purse when she found cash in my room. My explanations fell on deaf ears, drowned out by accusations and ridicule. Every attempt to make myself indispensable ended in failure. Each sacrifice felt like pouring water into cracked soil. It disappeared without leaving a trace. By the time I realized none of it mattered, the weight of my disappointments crushed me. All those nights spent studying until dawn, all those times I swallowed my pride and accepted their cruelty, none of it changed anything. They didn't care about my achievements or sacrifices. To them, I was invisible, disposable. And the worst part, I almost believed them. The night I left, the storm outside mirrored the chaos inside me. The argument had started like any other, my sister blaming me for our failures, my mom echoing her words without question, but this time it was different. This time they didn't just yell at me, they tore me apart piece by piece until there was nothing left to salvage. "We'd be better off without you," Mom spat out, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. She didn't stop there. "You'll never amount to anything anyway," she added, as if sealing my fate with those cruel words. My chest tightened, each breath feeling heavier than the last. And then came my sister's voice, shrill and venomous, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Don't ever come back. We don't need you here." Before I could process what she said, something hit me hard in the back. It was my old backpack, thrown violently toward me before landing on the wet floor. I turned around just in time to see her face twisted with rage, her eyes burning holes into mine. No remorse, no hesitation. Just pure disdain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body felt numb, disconnected from the weight of their words. Without another glance, I bent down, grabbed the soggy bag, and walked out the door. They didn't stop me. Not one of them moved to follow or even looked my way. Their silence was louder than any insult. They didn't care. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, soaking through my thin clothes within seconds. Each drop felt like ice against my skin, but I barely noticed. The cold air clawed at my lungs as I stepped further away from the house that had never truly been a home. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the empty streets, while thunder roared overhead, drowning out the sound of my own thoughts. Every step I took seemed to echo in the void between us, a distance far greater than physical space. My mind raced with fragments of memories, every insult, every accusation, every moment I had tried so desperately to prove myself, only to be met with rejection. It all crashed over me like waves during a hurricane threatening to pull me under. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a flicker of defiance. For the first time, I realized they were wrong about me. Maybe I didn't know where I was going or how I would survive, but I knew one thing for certain. I refused to let them define me anymore. As I stood alone in the pouring rain, my soaked clothes clinging to my trembling frame, I allowed myself a single thought. This isn't the end. Despite the crushing loneliness pressing down on me, despite the uncertainty stretching endlessly ahead, I clung to the tiniest sliver of hope. Somewhere out there beyond the storm was a future I could claim for myself. Life free from their cruelty, their neglect, their lies. And though I couldn't yet see it clearly, I promised myself I would fight for it. With shaking hands, I adjusted the strap of my backpack and began walking again. The road ahead was dark and treacherous, but I welcomed it. Anything was better than staying behind. Anything was better than being invisible. The first night I slept in the park, the cold seeped into my bones like a relentless intruder. The ground was hard and unforgiving beneath me, and every rustle of leaves felt like a threat lurking in the shadows. I had nowhere else to go, no money for even the cheapest motel room, no one willing to take me in. My backpack served as both my pillow and my only possession, a grim reminder of how little I truly owned. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but it wasn't just physical hunger that tormented me. It was the crushing weight of loneliness and despair. For hours, I lay there staring at the dark sky, wondering if this was all life had left for me. By day, I wandered aimlessly until I stumbled upon a small cafe with free Wi-Fi. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could pretend even briefly that I still belonged somewhere. But after sitting too long with nothing more than a single cup of coffee, the manager approached me with thinly veiled irritation. "You'll have to leave," he said curtly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. As I stepped back onto the streets, shame burned hotter than the midday sun. I felt invisible again just as I had been in my own home. But this time the world itself seemed determined to erase me entirely. One evening as I walked back to the tiny shared apartment I eventually managed to rent, disaster nearly struck. A man followed me down an alleyway, his footsteps echoing menacingly behind mine. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst out of my chest. I quickened my pace, clutching my bag tightly against me, but he kept closing the distance. Just as panic threatened to consume me, a stranger appeared from nowhere, shouting something unintelligible but forceful enough to scare the man off. Trembling, I thanked the stranger before fleeing to safety. That night, curled up on my mattress in the cramped apartment, I cried, not just from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of constantly fighting to survive. To make ends meet, I worked 16-hour days without rest. By morning, I tutored students who barely paid me enough to cover lunch. By night, I scrubbed dishes in a dingy restaurant kitchen, my hands raw and cracked from endless exposure to scalding water and harsh detergents. There were days when I collapsed onto the floor after work, too weak to move. Once, during a tutoring session, I fainted right in front of a student's parents. They stared at me horrified while I struggled to regain consciousness. Humiliation washed over me. But what choice did I have? Giving up meant returning to the life I'd escaped a fate worse than death. But amidst the chaos, something inside me began to shift. Each rejection, each hardship chipped away at the fragile shell of self-doubt I'd carried for years. Slowly, painfully, I started believing in myself not because anyone else believed in me, but because I had no other option. I poured every ounce of energy into improving my skills, teaching myself new methods to help my students excel. Word spread slowly but steadily. Soon, I had more clients than I could handle. Parents praised my dedication. Students credited their successes to my guidance. And for the first time, I felt seen not as a shadow or a burden, but as someone valuable. I began dreaming bigger. What if I could reach beyond local tutoring? What if I could create something lasting, something scalable? Late at night, after grueling shifts at the restaurant, I studied digital marketing tutorials online, scribbling notes by dim lamplight. I invested every spare dollar into building a website, designing courses, and running ads. At first, sales trickled in one here to there, but then momentum grew. Students raved about my lessons, sharing them with friends online. Overnight, everything changed. Orders flooded in, and suddenly, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Looking back now, I realize those early struggles forged me into someone stronger, sharper, more resilient. Every sleepless night, every bruised ego, every moment of doubt pushed me closer to the person I am today. I learned that success isn't handed to you. It's clawed out of the dirt, built brick by brick through sheer willpower. And though the scars remain, they remind me not of pain, but of triumph. The day my SAT prep course went viral, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just another forgotten face from high school. I was someone people admired, envied, even resented. Old acquaintances started reaching out, pretending to reconnect after years of silence. One message stood out. "Hey, it's me. Congrats on your success. Can you hook me up with a discount for your course?" The audacity made my blood boil. These were the same people who had mocked me, called me worthless, and dismissed my dreams when I was at my lowest. Without hesitation, I typed back, "Sorry, but no." Their angry replies came flooding in, accusing me of being arrogant, ungrateful, heartless, but I didn't care. For once, I held all the power, and I wasn't about to hand it over to those who never believed in me. On my birthday, the first one I celebrated without guilt or loneliness, I bought myself a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't just a home. It was a declaration of independence, a trophy earned through years of relentless struggle. My family had never thrown me a party, not even acknowledged this day existed. But now, surrounded by friends who truly valued me, I felt alive. I placed a bouquet of sunflowers on the dining table, a gift to myself, and toasted to the woman I had become. I decided to share my journey online, posting an honest account of how I rose from nothing to build something extraordinary. The response was overwhelming. Millions viewed my story, praising my resilience and determination. But amidst the praise were venomous comments from old classmates and distant relatives accusing me of betrayal, calling me ungrateful for cutting ties with my family. Reading their words stung, but only briefly. They couldn't understand because they hadn't lived my pain. This life, the one filled with purpose, respect, and joy, was mine alone to define. As I stood on my balcony that night, looking out at the glittering skyline, I felt a profound sense of pride. I had built this empire brick by brick, defying every voice that told me I'd fail. And as I sipped champagne under the soft glow of fairy lights, I realized something powerful. I didn't need anyone else's approval anymore. The morning started like any other, coffee in hand, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise apartment. I was reviewing feedback from students when my phone buzzed incessantly on the counter. At first, I ignored it. These days, calls were usually work-related or spam, but then I saw her name flash across the screen. Mom. My stomach tightened instantly. After years of silence, their sudden reappearance felt like a slap in the face. When I finally answered, her voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and desperation. "Please," she sobbed, barely coherent. "We're ruined without you." "Your sister? She's sick. She needs surgery. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything." Her words tumbled out in a chaotic rush, each sentence more dramatic than the last. When I hesitated, she dropped the bombshell. "I can't go on like this anymore. If you won't save us, I'll end it all tonight." The threat hung heavy in the air, but something about her tone didn't sit right. It wasn't genuine despair. It was manipulation cloaked as vulnerability. Then came my sister's barrage of texts flooding my inbox like an unrelenting storm. Hundreds of messages poured in over hours, each one escalating in urgency. "I'm dying inside," one read. "They say I might not make it if I don't get treatment soon," another claimed. She even sent pictures of herself lying in bed, pale and frailer. So she wanted me to believe, but I knew her too well. This wasn't illness. It was performance art designed to guilt-trip me into compliance. And then there was Dad, whose silence had always been his weapon. For years, he'd stood by while Mom and my sister tore me apart. Now, for the first time, he called. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I've lost my job. We're drowning in debt. Without your help, we'll lose the house." Each word felt like a calculated blow striking at the remnants of whatever lingering affection I might still harbor for them. But the hardest part wasn't there, please. It was the war raging inside me. A small, stubborn part of me wanted to believe them, to forgive and forget. Maybe they really were desperate. Maybe they had changed. But the rest of me, stronger, wiser, part knew better. They weren't reaching out because they cared about me. They were reaching out because they needed something. And once they got what they wanted, they'd discard me again just like before. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Should I respond? Should I give them what they wanted? The thought of sending money made my chest ache, not because I couldn't afford it, but because it would mean letting them back into my life. It would mean undoing years of progress, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. In the end, I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and stepped onto the balcony, letting the cool breeze wash over me. Below, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the chaos unfolding in mine. As I looked out at the skyline, I reminded myself of how far I'd come and how much I stood to lose if I let them drag me back. Their voices echoed in my mind, pleading, threatening, begging. But beneath the noise, a single truth rang clear. I owed them nothing. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed her. Mom's voice cracked as she described my sister's downward spiral, dropped out of school, living on the streets, hopeless. "She needs you," she pleaded, desperation dripping from every word. My chest tightened, and a pang of guilt twisted inside me. What if this time was different? What if they truly needed my help? The image of my sister wandering alone, broken, flashed in my mind. And for a second, I felt that old familiar ache, the urge to fix things, to be the hero they never appreciated. But then the memories came rushing back. Years of blame, accusations, and neglect. Every insult, every time they pushed me aside like I didn't matter, it all replayed in vivid detail. They had their chance to care, to see me, but they chose not to. Why should I risk everything I'd built for people who only reached out when it benefited them? I hit record on my phone, capturing every word of the call. If they tried to twist this later, if they accused me of being heartless or abandoning them, I'd have proof. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. Not this time. That night, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, scribbling furiously. Page after page filled with raw emotion, anger, sadness, betrayal. I explained why forgiveness wasn't an option. Why reopening old wounds would destroy the life I'd fought so hard to create. But as I read over the letter, something stopped me. Who was I writing this for? Did they deserve an explanation? No. Crumpling the pages into a ball, I tossed them into the trash. They didn't deserve my words, my time, or my energy. The next morning, I woke up with clarity. I sent a single text to Mom. I'm done. 3 words. Cold and final. It wasn't just a message. It was a declaration. A line drawn in stone. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't look back. The knock on my door came late in the evening, sharp and insistent. I froze for a moment, unsure of what awaited me on the other side. Peering through the peephole, my stomach churned at the sight. Mom, Dad, and my sister standing together like ghosts from a past I had buried deep inside. They looked disheveled, their faces pale and drawn, but something about them felt off. My heart raced as I hesitated, but curiosity or perhaps morbid fascination forced me to open the door. Mom was the first to step forward, her hands trembling as she clutched a small knife against her chest. Please, she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. If you won't help us, then there's no point in going on. Her words hung heavy in the air, a manipulative ploy disguised